Welcome to week 5 of our message series for this Easter. What do you do when God isn't in the place where you left him? An answer to this question, or at least the reason behind this question during the first few weeks of our Easter season, was quite obvious. The disciples and Mary Magdalene had been to the tomb and it was empty. So where was God where he's not in the place where you left him? But there's a deeper question behind this theme. How to resolve the issues that are things that happen in our world for which there is no simple answer, especially when the question is formed as, why doesn't God care? Now, by themselves, the disciples and Mary of Magdala were not able to answer the question raised by the empty tomb. They did, however, have some extraordinary experiences. Jesus appeared to them. And as we heard 2 weeks ago, Jesus said to them, "This is what I meant when I said, when I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms has to be fulfilled." And then they were able to hear as he explained what that meant. For us to find those kind of answers, I suggested last week that we might go back and use our Sunday lectionary, the readings the church provides for us during the seasons of the year, and especially to read the readings that are provided during the Lenten season, both Sunday and on weekdays. We find there a lot from the law of Moses, from the prophets and from the Psalms, which tell us about the coming of the Messiah and how he was to suffer and die and rise again. But then we come to that deeper question. Questions people ask about war, sickness, evil, and everything and anything else for that matter, for which we struggle, as these most difficult questions to answer and frequently can only be answered through prayer and faith. Now, in case you think that I'm just falling back on prayer and faith and saying that's the easy answer, I'd like to draw your attention to some of the passages that we're reading last week, this week and next week from John's Gospel, which take us into the story of how God cares for his people in specific ways. Last week we had one of the statements that John uses 7 times in his Gospel, an I am statement. Jesus told the people, "I am the good shepherd." The good shepherd is the one who lays down his life for his sheep. Now, any person of a Jewish background who heard Jesus speak about himself as I am would have either been completely angry or completely fascinated, because God used that language when Moses asked him in the book of Exodus, "Who will I say sent me?" And God said to him, "This is what you must say, I am." That's who sent you, I am. And so when Jesus uses this language, he is linking himself very closely to the Father. And there is no kind of way in which you can question what he's saying. You might doubt it, but he's making a very powerful statement. As I said, there are 7 statements. We have the second one today, I am the vine, you are the branches. The other statements are quite simply, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the gate of the sheepfold, I am the resurrection and the life, and I am the way, the truth, and the life. Obviously, they won't provide of themselves a straightforward answer to our question, but they do show something about how God, through Jesus, relates to us in the ordinary experiences of our days and our lives. Now, going back to today's reading and to the passage about the vineyard, many of you would know that I have a personal interest in wine. And although I don't claim to have any great expertise in the area, I do take note of what's happening both here and interstate about wines in Australia. I'm fascinated by the skills of the viniculturists who oversee the growing of the grapes, and then the winemakers who produce wine from the harvested grapes. And while skills today are generally well supported by uni and ag college degrees, the processes have been around for millennia, and we heard that in today's gospel. For the language that Jesus uses is the language of the vineyard owner caring for his vines to ensure that they produce good and abundant fruit. But in his description, Jesus goes a little further and actually calls himself the vine, the essential part of the plant that provides the quality of the grapes that are produced. So let's listen to some of the language he uses. He says, he is the vine, while we, the branches, are attached to him. His father is the vine dresser, the one with the pruning gear, and he tells us that this pruning is important. He says, every branch in me that bears no fruit, he cuts away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes to make it bear even more. Almost 20 years ago, as I was coming back from my time with the Navy in the Gulf, I took a few days break afterwards. I cheated a little bit. I said to the Tasmanians, my family, that I was going on a few days break with some sailors from the ship. And to the sailors on the ship, I said, I'm taking a break with some friends from Tasmania. Because I'd lived in a tiny cabin on board HMAS Darwin with one other officer, and I wanted some time by myself. So I went off for 6 days down the Margaret River. And while I was there, I went on a bush tucker wine tour. If you ever get there, do it. One of the winemakers at the vineyard we called at told us that they deliberately choose to have a small harvest of grapes. So they allow only 2 buds on each branch. They said it means that we're not going to get as many grapes, but the quality is always going to be good quality. So listen to him. I was thinking of this passage from John's Gospel that tells us that he's going to prune us so that what we do is produce more fruit and better fruit. When Jesus speaks about more, he's not saying the quantity, he's talking about the quality. And that's what God wants of us, quality. And then Jesus goes on to remind the disciples that none of us can exist apart from him. He says, make your home in me as I make mine in you. Just think about that for a second. God makes his home in me, in you. He doesn't want us to be separated from him. He wants us. He wants to be with us. And then he says, as a branch cannot bear fruit all by itself, but must remain part of the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me. God wants to be with us, and he wants us to produce fruit. As I mentioned over these last few weeks, an important part of how we find God, who isn't where we left him, happens when we're part of a community, when we work together to live the story of the gospel. Jesus said in Luke's gospel, stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high. He was saying to them, stay together so that together you may be witnesses of the Spirit at Pentecost. So the same is true for us. We need to stay together, to worship together, to pray together, so that we might produce the fruits that we can share with others, so that they too will accept the invitation to come to know the risen Lord. Because every time somebody shares something with us, we feel different towards them. We want to reach out to them in gratitude for what they have shared with us. So go back just for a second to the work of those involved in production of wine. There is a point to this. If the grapes are ordinary, then that's the time that the winemaker, that's what the grapes that the winemaker has to work with. So he relies on the skills of the viniculturist, notwithstanding the impact of climatic conditions, to produce the best possible grapes. Now, if everything works for the good, then the winemaker has the task of treating the grapes in such a way to produce the best wine. Now, it will be done according to his style and his skills. And each winemaker uses different skills, and the results can be quite extraordinary. Some years ago, I was fortunate to get a box of 6 wines. They were grown from the same, or they were made from the same 36 rows of grapes by 6 different winemakers. Now, each winemaker had 6 rows. I'll do the first couple because I can get them right. 1, 7 and 13, 2, 8 and 14, and after that I'm not going to try to go in 6s. But they had not consecutive rows, but one every 6 row, and they made these bottles of wine. The difference in style and taste of those wines was extraordinary, and yet they were taken from the same 36 rows. Now, a reason for mentioning that is that each one of us is going to produce a different kind of wine. The gifts that we have are going to be different, and yet we're called to produce the fruit that best celebrates God's love for us. Now, we all start from the same space. We've all attached to the vine. We've all been treated by the vine dresser to prepare us for what we've got. But then we are the ones who have to make use of those gifts to make a difference. The end result depends on us and what we do. Now, our gifts may never be recognised by the Tasmanian Wine Show or mentioned in Halliday's Wine Companion, or we might not be canonised by the church. But we can be much better than juice that ends up as vinegar. All of us have something to offer. All of us have something to give, and that's what God is asking of us. So, if we're to do something about finding God in the place where we left him, when we got there and he's not there, then we have to look at what do we do to make use of what our relationship, our friendship, our knowledge of God is all about, because it's got to be more than knowing about God. It has to be because we are in relationship with God. He wants to be with us. What is our response to him? Obviously, it's going to be through sharing with him. At the end of the Eucharistic prayer in the doxology, I pray through him and with him and in him. And that's what God wants of us, that we do things through him, with him and in him, because he is part of us. John tells us in that second reading today what are the important things of life. He says that we believe in the name of his Son and we love one another as he taught us. That's the great commandment. We only do that within a community. We don't do it as an isolated individual. So what we're called to be is to grow in our knowledge and our love of the vine dresser, the one who prunes us so that we can produce the fruits that will benefit and continue to support and build the kingdom. Then we have to go and tell everyone about this God who loves us and who invites us to experience his mercy and his kindness.